extended family, members of Saving Grace Lutheran Church, enjoy our service today.
The second reading comes to us from 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, beginning with the 23rd verse. For I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night in which he was betrayed, took a loaf of bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Walking on the road to Jerusalem, time had come to sacrifice again. My two small sons, they walked beside me on the road. The reason that they came was to watch the Lamb. Daddy, Daddy, what will we see here? There's so much that we don't understand. So I told them of Moses and Father Abraham. And then I said, "Dear children, watch the Lamb. For there will be so many in Jerusalem today. We must be sure the Lamb doesn't run away." Then I told them of Moses and Father Abraham. And then I said, "Dear children, watch the Lamb." When we reached the city, I knew something must be wrong. There were no joyful worshipers, no joyful worship songs. I stood there with my children in the midst of angry men. And then I heard the crowd cry out, they cried, "Crucify him." We tried to leave the city, but we could not get away. Forced to play in this drama, a part I did not wish to play. Why upon this day were men condemned to die? Why were we standing here where soon they would pass by? I looked and said, "Even now they come." The first one cried for mercy, the people gave him none. The second one was violent, he was arrogant and loud. I still can hear his angry voice screaming at the crowd. Then someone said, "There's Jesus," and I scarce believed my eyes. man so badly beaten, he barely looked alive. Blood poured from his body, from the thorns upon his brow. Running from the cross, falling to the ground. I watched him as he struggled, I watched him as he fell. The cross came down upon his back, the crowd began to yell. In that moment I felt such agony, in that moment I felt such loss, until a Roman soldier grabbed my arm and screamed, "You carry his cross." At first I tried to resist him, then his hand reached for his sword. So I knelt and took the cross from the Lord. I placed it on my shoulder and started down the street. The blood that he'd been shedding was running down my cheek. They led us to Golgotha. They drove nails deep in his feet and hands. And yet upon the cross I heard him pray, "Father, forgive them." Oh, never have I seen such love in any other eyes. Into thy hands I commit my spirit, he prayed, and then he died. I stood for what seemed like years. I'd lost all sense of time, until I felt two tiny hands holding tight to mine. My children stood there weeping. I heard the oldest say, "Father, please forgive us." The lamb ran away. Daddy, Daddy, what have we seen here? There's so much that we don't understand. So I took them in my arms. We turned and faced the cross. And then I said, "Dear children, watch the Lamb."
Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given him all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table. He took off his outer robe. He tied a towel around himself, and he poured his water into a basin. And he began to wash the disciples' feet. And he wiped them with the towel that was tied around him. And he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash, except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew that the one who was to betray him. For this reason, he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, he put on his robe and had returned to the table, and he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord. You are right, for that is what I am. But if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you should also do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. And if God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
He guides our lives. He teaches us what love is all about. Matter of fact, he knows it so completely that our understanding of love is sometimes far less than complete. And when we try to understand love, we try to act ourselves into love. There is a newspaper columnist, a minister who was also a minister, George Crane. He tells of a wife who came to his office full of hatred toward her husband. She said, I don't only want to get rid of him, I want to get even with him before I divorce him. I want to hurt him so much, I want to hurt him as much as he's hurt me. Dr. Crane suggested an ingenious plan. He said, why don't you go home, act as if you really love your husband. Tell him how much he means to you, praise him for every decent trait, go out of the way to be kind, considerate, generous as possible, share no effort to please him and to enjoy him. And make him believe that you love him. And after you've convinced him of your undying love for him, that you cannot live without him, then drop the bomb. Tell him that you are going to get a divorce, and then you can really hurt him. With revenge in her eyes, she smiled and she said, beautiful, beautiful. He'll never know. And so she left the room with enthusiasm, acting as if for 2 months that she showed love, kindness, listened, giving, was reinforcing him and sharing with him. But she didn't return. She didn't return back to the office 2 months later, and so Dr. Crane called and he said, "Are you ready now to go ahead with the divorce?" And she exclaimed this. She said, "Never. I discovered that I really do love him." Her actions changed, her feelings, her motion resulted in emotion, and the ability to love was not something that was just a fervent promise. It was repeated often and became a part of her life in the way that she lived. Now, why do I tell you that story? Not so that we can understand that when we talk about our own love, well, this is the reason why I tell you. Because when we talk about our own love, we always are limited. We talk about acting into love. We talk about how to love those who are very difficult to love. We talk about how we can get along with difficult people. There's even books written on it. And yet in the midst of that, Jesus has this ability to love us unconditionally. Now, there are many different understandings of love. And so I'm going to start with the human understandings of love. The worst one is mania, which is an obsessive love. and it becomes a little bit overdrawn in one's life, then sometimes there's even restraining orders that are needed. There's something called ludus, which is a playful love. There's something called pragma, which is an enduring love. To the Greeks, this was a good understanding of love. This is someone that stood by one another throughout their life. There's something called storge, which is a familiar love. That is like a mother bearing their newborn, this type of familial type love. There is philata, which is self-love. And there is philia, which is an affectionate or a friendship type love. And then there is eros, which is erotic love. All these are Greek understandings of love. And in the Bible, you know, it only mentions agape and it mentions phileo or philia. It doesn't mention eros in that type of love. Agape is God's unconditional love. And this is something that we often put God into our skin and we say, well, this is how God must love other people because this is how I love other people. And that's where we're wrong. We can't start with our own selves. We have to start with who Christ is. Today is called Maunday Thursday. It comes from mandat or mandatum, which means a mandate of or a commandment that is given. So on this Thursday, we remember that a commandment was given to us. A new commandment I give you, Jesus says, that you love one another just as I have loved you, so you also are to love one another. Now, we have to understand what's taken place. Jesus is now in the upper room. He's having the Last Supper with his disciples, and as they are partaking, before they partake of the Last Supper, he takes off his outer robe and he ties a towel around him and he starts to wash the disciples' feet, something that only servants would do. And he starts to do the work of a servant, actually. None of the other disciples are going to do that because that's something that a servant does. And yet Jesus, who is the teacher, takes off his outer robe, wraps a towel around his waist, and he starts to wash their feet until he gets to Peter. And he said, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. Jesus answered, you do not know what I'm going to do, but later you'll understand. He says, you just don't get it yet, Peter. It's okay. And Peter said, well, you'll never wash my feet. And he said, well, if I don't wash your feet, then you have nothing to do with me. You might as well leave. And of course, Peter goes overboard and he says, well, then not only my feet, but my hands and my head also. But Jesus reminds him that those who are clean, those who are forgiven, don't need to be washed. They know the preparation has already taken place. He has already been bathed as he took preparation for the Passover meal. And so he is clean, but he is clean, although not everyone is clean within the room. That is Judas. You see, even this act of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples is an act of love beyond anything that we could imagine. How many times have you disagreed with somebody in the last, 3-4 years? How many times have you disagreed with someone to the point that it actually made you angry? Has that ever happened to anyone? Has it ever come to a point where you said, boy, I don't know if I can tolerate that person's presence, or I don't know what I'm going to say to them, or boy, that just really steams me up. But here Jesus takes off his outer garment and he washes their feet. By the way, in just a little while, they will all desert him. Yet he still loves them. Having loved his own that were in the world, he loved them to the end, it says. And yet we think that we are capable of this type of agape love. I am reminded time and time again when little Magnus, even though he's 3 years old, sometimes he gets a little bit full of himself. And sometimes it's kind of fun because I can just laugh, you know. He'll tell a lie right to my face, and it's tough. I have to hold it back because I know I have to do the right thing and try to teach him something. and get the truth out of them. But it's so difficult because, well, you know, just like with any of your kids, huh? You love them, and so you can't help but know all the stuff behind. Of course, you love them no matter what happens. But it's kind of cute. Now, this is what Jesus does, even when we set our hearts against him, even when we say no, even when we get frustrated because, you know, we really, this social distancing is difficult. Matter of fact, sometimes I'll be here with Pastor Dan, and we are, 20 feet apart from each other, and we'll be talking about things, and I'll say, Pastor Dan, am I on edge? And he'll say, yes, you are. And I'll have to say, I'm sorry, because we're all human. In the midst of that, Jesus still comes into our life. He says, well, let me tell you what this is all about, what this love truly is about. You're called to be a servant of the servant. There's no one that's below you. You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, that's what I am, Jesus says. But if your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet, it says. The most difficult thing to do for a son or a daughter is to say, I love you, when they've just said that they don't love you. And yet it's more difficult when they're not related. To love them no matter what their background, no matter what their points of view, isn't that what Christ calls us to? To realize that even when everybody might be a little bit on edge, that we're called to love one another. It brings us to a meal where we find forgiveness. It brings us to the one place where we find hope. It brings us to the cross where Christ poured out his blood for us. Martin Luther said this, that all you have to do is believe the words for you. That this was given for you, that this blood was shed for you. To believe and to know that this sacrament, this forgiveness, is for you. When we realize our shortcomings, we realize that God is there with us every step of the way to give us strength for tomorrow. This agape type of love is defined in who Christ is and what he has done. It is a gift of the Holy Spirit. So that it says, by contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against this there is no such law. And those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh and the passions and desires. For we live by the Spirit, so let us also be guided by that Spirit. Do you hear that? Then he goes on to push what this understanding of love is. That is in Galatians 6, he says, if anyone is detected in a transgression, that is, if anyone sins. Now, I understand that in families it's getting a little bit difficult. People are practicing more social distancing. You go to that room and you go to that room, right? And in the midst of that, they're trying to keep peace. But here, if you find someone that has done something wrong, then you do it, you restore them in a spirit of gentleness. That is, you don't say, oh boy, you really messed up now. You say, maybe we can walk through this together. What can we do? In a spirit of gentleness. To bear one another's burdens, as it says in verse 2 of chapter 6, Galatians. In the same way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. 1 Corinthians 13 says, actually, 1 Corinthians 13 says, love is patient, love is kind. Love is not envious, boastful, arrogant, or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. All these things. It does. And that's what we'll see tomorrow, when we see Christ go to the cross for us. And the promise that Christ has given us is what we'll see on Easter Sunday morning. That even death itself cannot lay swage against us. He gives us a promise beyond anything that we could ever imagine. He reminds us that love calls us to another level. That is, not to act that what we consider love to be, but to follow him. When Jesus says, "Follow me," he asks us or bids us follow him every day. What is love? One unknown source said this: it is silence. It is silence when your words would hurt. It is patience when your neighbors hurt. It is deafness when there are other flaws. It is thoughtfulness when you hear of others' woes. It is promptness when duty calls, and is courage even in the face of fear. You see, it's natural to love those who are easy to love, but it's supernatural to love those who hate us. He calls us to help us to understand that love is something deeper than anything that we could ever imagine. He calls us from the very cross. He reminds us that his love that he bore for us is because of our sin. And he never lets us go. Even when we're uncertain of what tomorrow might bring, he still is there for us. And it's so much more than love. Sometimes we just have to wait. So be it, Lord. Amen.